Chapter 3. Creating Dangerous Dogs. The Newfoundland and the Northern Breeds. The Newfoundland. Like the Bloodhound, the Newfoundland is another breed of dog that figured predominantly in fatal and severe attacks in the latter part of the 19th century, yet has ceased to be an issue in fatalities in the 20th century. The Newfoundland dog was commonly found in episodes of canine aggression from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. In just one city, Chicago, there were 2 fatal attacks by a Newfoundland dog during this time period. However, after the second decade of the 20th century, the Newfoundland dog all but disappears from reported cases of attacks. As with bloodhounds, the question becomes, how is it that this breed was overrepresented in aggressive encounters with humans during one era and vastly underrepresented during another time period? Most people today have an image of the Newfoundland dog as a large, black, shaggy dog that has been known to be used by fishermen and to aid drowning victims. While this perception is unchanged from the uses and image that 19th century America had of the Newfoundland, it appears this breed of dog played another important role in the 1800s that accounts for its appearance in severe and fatal attacks on humans. Newspaper accounts indicate that Newfoundlands were used frequently as guard and protection dogs during the late 1800s. This may seem strange to many, as the Newfoundland breed is usually associated with humane service towards man. However, the basis for using the Newfoundland as guard dogs in the 19th century is supported by the description of the breed in the 1911 Encyclopaedia Britannica. They are easily taught to retrieve on land or water, and their strength, intelligence and fidelity make them specially suitable as watchdogs or guardians. Additionally, the Newfoundland is a working breed, originally bred by the early settlers of Newfoundland Island in Canada to pull sleds, hunt and guard. The Newfoundland dog seems to have been exceedingly popular in the latter part of the 19th century, and like the Bloodhound was one of the first breeds registered by the newly formed American Kennel Club in 1886. Newspapers of the day were filled with tales of everyday life with Newfoundland dogs. Along with the more mundane events of owners and their dogs, there were also numerous reports of Newfoundlands being alternately heroic or vicious. The newspapers at the time seemed to relish a good dog rescues boy story as much as a dog attacks boy story, and the Newfoundland dog seemed to provide much fodder for both these human interest stories. The popularity of the breed, their use as guard dogs, and incidents of physical abuse ensures that a number of Newfoundland dogs would be found in cases of aggression against humans. Most dogs suffer abuse and provocation without retaliation, and this often leads to reckless behavior by some individuals. The forgiving nature of dogs allows most humans to escape unscathed from negligent and cruel acts towards our canine companions, but not always. An 1890 article entitled, "A Dog's Revenge," describes the events preceding a fatal mauling of an infant by a Newfoundland dog. And here again, 19th century accounts were brutally honest in detailing harsh treatment dogs received at the hands of humans and how this was believed to have contributed to an attack by the dog. The Newfoundland in this incident was recently obtained by a family, and the mother had occasion to punish the dog. How severely or what form of punishment was used on the dog was not described. The rest of the report goes on to tell how the woman then left the dog and infant on the front porch of the cabin and went down to the creek. When she returned, she found the dog had killed the child. Human behavior is often even more inexplicable than canine behavior. In 1893, a 14 year-old boy for unknown reasons decided to kick a large Newfoundland dog he encountered on the streets of Cincinnati. It was reported in the newspapers that the dog resented the kick and responded by attacking the boy so savagely that he died from his injuries. Another case of a boy teasing a dog and the animal attacking an innocent girl occurred in Ohio in 1891. It was reported as follows. Yesterday evening, as the little daughter of James Walker was walking along a street, on the west side, a boy jerked a bone from a Newfoundland dog with which he was playing, and threw it, the bone falling on the pavement near the little girl's feet. The dog made a rush for it, knocking the girl down. She fell upon the bone, hiding it from view, when the dog planted its teeth in her cheek. He bit her several times, and her face and neck were terribly mangled before the dog could be driven away. Weekly News, Mansfield, Ohio, June 4, 1891. Although the history of the Newfoundland was based in guarding, hunting and sledding, it was with the increased use of the breed in the late 19th century as guard dogs and the physical abuse directed towards many of these dogs that explains their appearance and incidents of aggression towards humans. Rabies, hydrophobia. Interestingly, there seem to be a disproportionate number of reported mad or rabid Newfoundland dogs attacking people. While some of these dogs were described with obvious signs of the disease, it appears that others were suspected of being rabid because the behavior, attack, bite, was not within the expected temperament of the breed. It is not possible to know whether the scores of reports of mad Newfoundland dogs were an aberration, whether the breed was so popular that there would understandably be increased cases of rabies within the breed, or whether the aggressiveness in these dogs seemed so out of character that rabies seemed the only reasonable explanation for attacks on humans. Though there exists a remote possibility of rabies involvement in any of the severe/fatal attacks during the 19th century, undoubtedly most severe dog attacks were due to non-rabies-related aggression. While rabies was greatly, and to some degree legitimately, feared, deaths from the virus were not nearly as common as people believed. More than a few persons of some author, ity, were quoted in the late 1800s and early 1900s as stating that the number of deaths and confirmed cases of rabies did not support the hysteria surrounding the disease. There is little question that the fear of rabies was much greater than the probability of contracting the disease. While the incidence of rabies may have been limited, the fear of the disease was very real. Reports of individuals committing suicide after being bitten by a suspected rabid dog illustrate the hysteria that could so easily be roused by even the suggestion of a rabid animal. Any abnormal behaviors in a dog could easily be a death sentence for that animal when a wave of rabies hysteria overcame a community. For these reasons it was vitally important for the people in the late 1800s and early 1900s to have been observant of normal versus abnormal canine behaviors. This could be one explanation for the insightful accounts of dog attacks reported in the news. Understanding triggers or provocation that contributed to normal canine aggression would alleviate the fear that the dog was behaving erratically or unpredictably, a sign of rabies. Many dog bite articles paid special attention to differentiating between a maddened dog and a mad dog. It was common to find the dogs involved in attacks described as an ill-tempered brute, but not mad, or an enraged, but not mad dog. The rabies virus is fascinating in that in order for the disease to transmit from host to host, the virus requires a change in the infected animal's behavior to cause it to bite another victim. The virus accomplishes this by increasing the aggression in some animals, causing them to bite indiscriminately. This behavior change usually does not occur until the end stages of the disease, when other symptoms of the disease are also visible. Once the virus is transmitted through the saliva of an infected animal, the incubation or latent period of the disease normally lasts 3 to 12 weeks. During this time the infected animal usually appears healthy and its behavior is not noticeably affected. But once the virus has migrated to the central nervous system, spinal cord and brain, symptoms begin to appear and the disease spreads rapidly. The first phase of symptoms of rabies tends to be subtle, lasting only 2 to 3 days. In the second phase, also known as the furious phase, signs of the disease become much more obvious, with dogs displaying erratic behaviors, including episodes of aggression, ingesting inedible objects, disorientation and other abnormal behavior. The third and final stage of symptoms is unmistakable and lasts approximately 2 to 4 days. Here the animal may appear to be choking, there is a dropping of the lower jaw, and the inability to swallow leading to the drooling and foaming of saliva, foaming at the mouth. Paralysis then occurs and the animal rapidly enters into a coma and dies. Dogs in the final stages of rabies were seemingly not difficult to diagnose. However, it was the first stage of symptoms when signs were more subtle, where errors would be most often found as to what was driving an attack, i.e., rabies versus normal canine aggression. An 1889 dog attack in Hoboken, New Jersey, appears to be a legitimate case of rabies infection. Although no mention is made of physical signs of rabies, the behavior of this dog is clearly not the behavior seen in normal types of canine aggression. The byline to the article, Men and Animals Bitten by a Dog Attacking All in Its Way, is a common description of the behavior in reported cases of rabid dogs. The account of this attack begins with a dog running into a stable near the railroad station and biting a man working there. The dog is then reported as running out into the street and attacking a young boy at a fruit stand. On its way down the street, the dog attacks another dog, before running towards the docks. There the dog darts into a group of 6 men, biting one of them. Before the police catch up with the dog, it had also attacked and bitten a draft horse. This type of indiscriminate snapping and random biting appears typical of rabid dogs. Non-rabid dogs involved in severe/fatal aggression are typically very focused during an attack, choosing one victim and attempting to return to that victim even after being pulled or beaten off. Rabid dogs were often reported biting multiple types of animals in rapid succession or, as the previous article stated, attacking all in its way, whether it be cows, horses, cats, other dogs, or humans. This type of attack was greatly distressing, as people feared not necessarily the physical damage done by the dog during an attack, but the transmission of rabies and ultimate death from the disease process of the virus. An exceedingly rare event was the death of a person due to an apparently rabid dog attacking with such forceful aggression as to cause traumatic wounds resulting in the immediate death of the victim, i.e., loss of blood, shock. A few cases were found where dogs attacked with such ferocity that it must have seemed to the persons of the time that rabies could be the only explanation. Reviewing some of these suspected cases of rabies reveals dogs exhibiting the same behaviors found in most cases of severe/fatal aggression found in non-rabid dogs, that is, attacking one victim with unrelenting intensity and then not attacking others attempting to interfere. In deference to the subjective beliefs of the witnesses at the time, these cases were not included in the listing of attacks. However, A fatal attack could be found in 1894, which appears to be a legitimate case of a rabid dog. The attack occurred in Dallas, Texas, and involved a Saint Bernard reported to be mad. The dog had bitten 7 people, killed 2 cats and attacked another dog. One of the 7 people attacked was Albert Adams, a Negro boy, who was bitten so badly that he died from his wounds. Obviously, since accurate laboratory testing was not available at the time, rabies could only be determined by observation of behavior and by physical signs of the disease, certainly far from a foolproof system. However, since many a person's life depended on observations of whether the aggression was due to rabies, and the people of the time showed a rather acute understanding of what constituted normal canine aggression, it is within Sun to concede to their conclusions as to whether a dog attack was due to rabies infection. If anything, fear, bordering on hysteria, may have made the incidence of rabies overreported in severe or fatal attacks by dogs. There was no hope for a cure until the 1880s, when Louis Pasteur, the famed chemist and bacteriologist, began studying the disease. Pasteur was able to isolate the virus and in May 1884 produced the first rabies vaccine for dogs. In July 1885 Pasteur successfully tested the vaccine on a human. In 1887, 2 years after Pasteur's treatment for rabies was developed, a rather interesting observation was made. It is noticeable that notwithstanding the numerous cases of bites by vicious dogs which have been recorded this summer, hardly a suggestion has been made of hydrophobia. Is it because Pasteur has robbed the disease of its terrors, or is it simply because the good sense of the people is improving? This makes sense. Once a cure for an ailment becomes available, the terror associated with the disease decreases. While rabies was a continuous worry during the 19th century in the United States, the disease was not as feared, and was noted to be less of an issue, in the northern regions of Canada. However, other issues dealing with normal, canine aggression could be found in the cold and harsh northern landscape where dogs performed a function exclusive to these snowbound regions. The northern breeds. Not surprisingly, most of the severe and fatal attacks by the northern breeds occurred in Alaska, Canada, and the Northern Territories. If it seemed that separating the bloodhound breed/types was a difficult task, attempting to make correct breed identifications with the northern breeds involved in attacks would require supernatural powers. The only information available about the breed or type of dog involved in fatalities in Alaska, Canada and the Northern Territories was that the dogs may have been one of the following breed/types: Husky, Siberian Husky, Alaskan Husky, Malamute, Alaskan Malamute, Eskimo Dog, Labrador Dog, Newfoundland Dog, Arctic Sled Dog. Sled Dog, Sleigh Dog, Sledge Dog, Wolf Dog, Wolf Hybrid, and any dog that might have been a mixture of these types/breeds. Many times the victim was described as being killed by a dog team or in a dog lot. Once again, breed identification in cases of aggression is not only impossible to document accurately, but it will be seen that the identification of individual dog breeds is of no relevance in the understanding or recognition of the circumstances which directly contributed to the development of severe aggression in these dogs. Fatal attacks by the northern breeds in the late 1800s and early 1900s were not considered terribly unusual or unexpected. The dogs kept in these frigid environs were considered only once removed from their direct ancestor, the wolf. Today, we accept the fact that people will die in automobile crashes as a necessary evil of being able to travel and move goods from place to place. 100 years ago, sled dogs provided the only means of communication, human transport and exchange of goods during the long winter months in Alaska, northern Canada and the Northern Territories. Sled dogs were often risky business, and the human deaths associated with keeping these dogs, though repugnant, were considered the cost of doing business. There is no denying the danger posed by some of these animals. A century ago, most sled dogs were semi-wild, poorly socialized, poorly fed, maintained as a pack, and treated harshly. Needless to say, this is the formula to use if one wishes to create a dangerous dog. How many Eskimos or native people were killed by these dogs will never be known. Even when the victims of these dogs were white settlers, there are only scant references to the incident. Most times, cases of fatal dog attacks by sled dogs are only mentioned in stories or reports on related matters. An important factor in the lack of documented cases of fatal attacks was the remoteness of the areas, poor communication and obvious lack of newspapers and community facilities, clerks, courts, police, medical examiners, etc. The following case of a fatal dog attack in Canada demonstrates the remoteness and difficulty in getting both information and persons out of these areas. A letter was received on April 28, 1925, at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Post in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, announcing the death of a woman at Chesterfield Inlet, in the northwestern extreme ity of Keewaydin, on Hudson Bay near the Arctic. The letter gave news of the circumstances that caused the death of Mrs. S. G. Clay. On September 19, 1924, Mrs. Clay, the wife of a Royal Canadian Mounted Police sergeant, was walking alone near the police camp when a sled dog attacked her. Immediately every other dog in the pack joined in the attack. She had been severely mauled before help from the mounted police camp arrived. Her leg had been so terribly lacerated that amputation was deemed necessary. The nearest surgeon was 1,000 miles away in Manitoba, so the local missionary and a member of the mounted police decided to take on the task. The unfortunate woman died 2 days later. The fact that this attack occurred in September of 1924 and news of it was not received until April of 1925 demonstrates the difficulty in getting information out of these desolate areas. No doubt, a special effort was made to relay this news because of the familiar aspect. It was news being sent about one mounted police wife to the wife of another mounted police officer, who, like the victim, was once stationed at this remote Hudson Bay post. It is no small irony that the news of Mrs. Clay's death was sent from Hudson Bay to Saskatchewan by dog team. Occasionally, an article or report on the viciousness of the northern breeds would list recent human fatalities caused by the sled dogs of the region. An article entitled "Devil Dogs of Labrador," published in 1908, talks of the sled dogs on the desolate coast of Labrador. This coastal area was reported to be peopled by 4,000 whites, 1,500 Eskimos, and frequent every summer by 30,000 Newfoundland fisher folk in the quest of cod. The only means of transportation in this area was by boat in summer and by dog team in winter. The author talks of the violent nature and behavior of the sled dogs in this region and lists the attacks that had occurred recently on the Labrador coast by sled dogs. Some years ago, during the summer, at Hebron, dogs killed an Eskimo boy of 13, who was dragging a seal from his father's boat to their tent. At Hopedale, an Eskimo boy and girl were killed and devoured. At Nain, dogs dragged a missionary's baby out of its cradle and reduced it to bone before the distracted mother found out. At Damo, dogs devoured a middle-aged woman before help could arrive. At Bardana, dogs killed a 15-year-old girl going to a well for water. A few years earlier, in 1903, another article about the dogs of Labrador recounted 2 fatalities that occurred the year before. In Cartwright, a child wandered from home, and when the distracted mother flew to where a pack of angry dogs were ravening, she found nothing but the bones of her offspring. A little girl was so badly mangled by them at Punchbowl last year that she never recovered. Obviously, none of these attacks are verifiable. But there is more than a ring of truth to these accounts, as locations, victims' ages and small details of the attack are given. Also lending credibility is the fact that these victims fit the profile of most dogs attack, i.c., infants, children wandering away from parents, and/or vulnerable persons walking alone. The accuracy of these individual attacks is not of paramount importance because there is little doubt that some of these dogs posed a significant danger to humans. Knowing exactly which humans they attacked is not critical in the examination of the forces involved in sled dog aggression. There was little disagreement that the sled dogs used in the late 1800s and early 1900s were a fierce lot. There is also little disagreement about the fact that these dogs were treated very harshly. An additional, but necessary, danger was the maintaining of sled dogs as an active functioning pack. While acts of extreme cruelty towards animals are still very prevalent today, it certainly is not the norm. 1 century ago, extreme cruelty towards sled dogs was the norm. They may be beaten into submission, but that will not prevent them still snarling their hatred. They may be starved into apparent docility and then die suddenly, with teeth fast locked in a brother's throat. The Wolf Dog of the North. The New York Times, July 8, 1900. From Harper's Weekly. They are the fiercest of any brutes trained to be of service to mankind. They will attack anything they believe weaker than themselves, and they are only kept in subjection by the unceasing use of the lash. The Dogs of Labrador. The Chronicle, January 29, 1903. Besides the unceasing use of the lash and being beaten into submission, sled dogs were often in a state of near starvation. Although fed well in the winter months when their energy was needed to pull heavy loads over long distances, in the summer months it was common to let the dogs forage for themselves. Many an attack on a person was recognized to be the result of this hungry pack condition. Unlike most descriptions of dog attacks where the victim was torn, lacerated or bitten by the dogs, many of the victims of sled dogs were reportedly devoured. After reviewing the circumstances and conditions of sled dogs in the early 20th century, it is fair to say that this term was meant literally and was not used for dramatization. In direct contrast to the elaborate recounting of bloodhound attacks in the big city news papers in the U.S., details of dog attacks in the remote areas of the North usually contained only a fleeting reference to a death by dogs. There was little sensationalism in these accounts, and it is doubtful that the term devoured was used to embellish the story, as there was really no story attached to these attacks. Most dogs found on the mainland United States did not operate and work together in large packs, as did the sled dogs of the North. Dogs in more densely populated and moderate climates, even if not fed, were able to scrounge for food near garbage dumps, homes, or farms, and usually had a variety of wild or domesticated animals on which to prey. The desolate and harsh northern regions had much less to offer dogs that needed to fend for themselves. All resources available to sled dogs were limited, and so their options for survival were also severely limited. Additionally, these dogs were not only poorly socialized with humans, but often the socialization they did have was decidedly negative. In extreme environments or in conditions with limited choices, extreme behaviors are more apt to occur. The conditions we find with these dogs are physically powerful dogs, very poorly socialized with humans, often starving with severely limited food resources, either tethered together as a pack or allowed to roam loose as a pack. Given these circumstances, predation does not seem unreasonable or exaggerated. Another reason to take the term devoured seriously is that throughout the vast expanse of the northern regions this description is used consistently over 3 decades, 1900 to 1930. While an argument could be made that most accounts of fatalities and predation by sled dogs a century ago cannot be substantiated, there is a fully documented recent case which duplicates most of the conditions and pack dynamics reported in fatal attacks by sled dogs a century ago. In August 1998, a family of 4, consisting of a husband, wife and 2 male children, aged 8 and 10, arrived on Zacharias Island, off the Labrador coast. The island was inhabited by a team of 8 Labrador/Husky sled dogs. The dogs had been left on the uninhabited island to roam during the summer months. The family was picking berries on the island and the wife became separated from her husband and 2 children. After hearing his wife's scream, the husband found her being attacked by the dogs. Throwing rocks at the dogs managed to disperse them from the woman, but she was already dead. The older child ran back to the boat to get matches, so a fire could be built to keep the dogs away from the woman's body until help could arrive. The dogs left the area where the woman's body lay, and circled the shoreline. When the father and younger son arrived at the boat they found the dogs feeding on the body of the older son. Again they threw rocks at the dogs, but this time the dogs did not disperse and they turned on the father and remaining son. Only by running into the water were they able to escape. This case involved predation and both victims were partially consumed. Although these dogs were not found to be starved, the attack is consistent with behaviors seen in situations where sled dogs function as a pack. The dynamics of group hunting and feeding, dogs operating as a social unit without owner direction, poor socialization with humans, and territorial aggression all contribute to the likelihood of dogs operating under these conditions having an increased probability of aggressive encounters with humans. If we subtract a century from the 1998 attack, add in some wolf strain, and consider a hungrier pack of dogs, the accounts of fatalities and predation in the earlier 1900s seem almost understated. In 1903 the following statement describes the sled dogs and the atmosphere surrounding the settlements. The coast folk find them indispensable, yet live in fear of them. No man ventures abroad without his whip, every woman carries a stout club, it is death to a child to get among them. In more modern times, 1961, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police decided to replace the native Huskies with a breed from Siberia after a series of attacks and fatalities by sled dogs. The RCMP commented, "Natives usually let their dogs run wild in the summer, and the semi-starved animals with a vicious wolf strain not deeply buried often attack humans, especially children. Last year 2 persons were killed by sled dogs. These native dogs are a menace by instinct. If you happen to fall, they'll be on you just for something to eat." The Valley Independent, December 12, 1961. Time and again, much of the aggressiveness found in the northern breeds is blamed the Valley Independent, December 12, 1961, on their affinity to the wolf. Breeding the native dogs with wolves was commonly practiced and, considering the condition and treatment these animals received, it is little wonder they would be a danger. While it is of no significance whether sled dogs were part husky, malamute, or any other breed, the crossing of these breeds with wolves is relevant. Although dogs are the direct descendant of the wolf, dogs are nevertheless domesticated, meaning that over the centuries, dogs have developed behaviors that allow for bonding with humans. Wolves are still very much wild animals. Adding wolf genes to a domesticated dog reduces the ability to bond with humans or the sociability of these animals. 1 century ago, sled dogs were poorly socialized with humans, treated harshly, and a pack mentality was a major factor in both their social behaviors and in their function as sled dogs. Add wolf genes into this already dangerously diminished bond with people and it is not difficult to see how aggression towards humans developed. For thousands of years, dogs have been inexorably interwoven into the lives of humans. However, it is extremely rare to find a person who has intimate knowledge or personal dealings with the two most extreme, yet diametrically different, types of canine behaviors, namely fatal aggression against humans versus dogs sacrificing their lives in the service of mankind. Miss Emily Morgan was a Red Cross nurse serving in Alaska during the 1920s. For 18 months, Miss Morgan braved the fierce cold and blizzards in the Aleutian Islands to provide medical care to the native people. While living there she also worked as a matron at the Methodist Women's Missionary Society for Destitute Waifs. Here she helped nurse back to health a small Aleutian orphan child named Alice Devlin. The child had been brought to the mission after her mother was killed by starving huskies. Although it is mentioned that the child arrived with a scar on her sunken cheeks made by the dogs, it was not explained how the child came to survive this attack by the pack of sled dogs which killed her mother. After serving in the Aleutian Islands, Miss Morgan went to Nome, Alaska. In 1925, Nome was in the midst of a diphtheria epidemic and Miss Morgan was reported to be the only Red Cross nurse in town to minister to those suffering from diphtheria. Her patients came to be the recipients of the serum which was delivered by the famous sled dog relay from Nenana to icebound Nome, a distance of 674 miles which took 20 men and over 200 dogs. More than one sled dog died during this frantic run to deliver life-saving serum. The dogs which perished during this tremendously arduous journey had literally run themselves to death in service to their masters and mankind. Perhaps Miss Morgan never gave any conscious thought to the fact that she was a first-person witness to the absolute worst canine behaviors towards a human and also the absolute best behaviors that most dogs contribute so freely and frequently towards mankind.